Nerd math incoming. I have a bone to pick with MTG Arena, and I don't care if you don't know what that is, I'm going to tell you about it. Bonus points if you tag them here in the comments. You've probably heard of Magic the Gathering. It's a physical card game, and MTG Arena is the digital version of that card game with some 10 million players. And obviously, I'm one of those 10 million players, and I'm actually one of the top ranking ones. This is me achieving Mythic for probably the 100th time. Needless to say, I like this game a lot, but there's one huge problem with it, and no, I am not talking about the shuffler. Although that is a conversation we need to have at some point. But no, I am talking about the deck limit. MTG Arena only allows you to have 100 MTG Arena decks. I'm gonna walk you through one step at a time why this deck limit is mathematically absurd. And you may be wondering, Nick, why do you need over 100 MTG Arena decks? Well, you see, Magic the Gathering puts out new cards every couple of months, and when they put out new cards and they enter standard, then the rotation changes, which means the meta of the game changes and newer strategies become more effective. So if you play every day, especially in high rankings, the meta is constantly changing and you constantly have to change your deck to adapt to that new meta. But you don't want to override your previous deck because one, what if that change makes your deck worse? And two, what happens if the main strategies in the meta work their way back around to strategies that were there a couple of months ago? You don't want to manually adjust your deck so it can be better against a strategy that was already there. You want to pull up the deck that you had that was already good at facing that strategy. And there are also more modes than just standard. There's historic, there's alchemy, there's singleton, and there's a bunch more. So if you want to be a competitive Magic player, you're probably gonna dip your toes in all of these different types of games, and you're probably going to want to adjust all of your decks every couple of days to the ever-forming new metas. So how fast will you hit 100 decks if you're just doing, let's say, standard and historic? Let's say if you adjust your standard deck once every couple of days and you adjust your historic deck once every week. For simplicity's sake, let's say we're starting with 0 decks and we have no nostalgia for any other previous deck that we may have made. So starting with 0, it would take us about 22 weeks to reach 99 decks. That's about 5 months, and considering the fact that MTG sets come out once every 3 months, at best case scenario, you can go through about 2 sets before you end up hitting the cap. And at times like right now, where the meta is constantly going to be centered around new Phyrexia no matter what sets come out, you are absolutely going to hit your deck cap before you end up needing one of your older decks. Which means if you end up deleting Blue Do Good 93 version number 2, you might end up needing that deck at some point. But now we can move on. Nick, I'm sure they've got good reasons for not allowing that many decks. They're a video game company. It probably has something to do with storage. Imagine how much it would cost to have all of those new decks if they increase the deck limit. Well, friend, I did the math on that too. So the biggest a deck is allowed to be in MTG Arena is 250 cards. I went ahead and made one of those 250 card decks, and I made sure that every single card in that deck was unique, and that's including lands, which means only 4 basic lands. In short, there is no way a deck like this could be competitive in any format. This is way bigger than any feasible deck. And MTG Arena allows you to export your saved decks so that way you can import them on another account or you can share them with friends. When I exported this deck, it copied to my clipboard about 6,884 bytes, which means if I decided to have 900 more of these decks, it would cost me on my computer about 6.2 meg. And if all 10 million players added 900 of these outlandish sized decks, it would cost MTG Arena servers about 61.96 terabytes, which is a big number, right? You'd think that that would be huge, but they're a video game company. That number's not really that big for them. And plus, this isn't even kind of a realistic scenario. Out of those 10 million players, not all of them are going to make 1,000 decks, and they're definitely not all going to be that huge each. So then I did some back of the napkin math and found out that after a few matches, the average deck size was about 76 cards, and that's including lands. I went ahead and made myself a realistic 76 card deck, and it worked out to be about 473 bytes, which is a far cry from the 6,884 bytes that huge deck was. If I decided to have 900 of those decks on my computer, it would cost my computer about 425 kilobytes of storage, which is very reasonable. And if 10 million players decided to have 900 of those decks, it would cost MTG Arena servers about 4.26 terabytes, which is less than the amount of space that I have on my gaming desktop. So long story short, if MTG Arena increased the deck cap to 1,000, I could hold all of those new decks. Just on my personal computer, the one that I use to play video games with. There is no excuse. Increase the deck cap, MTG Arena. This is getting ridiculous.